Hello, Swifto here, and this is part 6 of my stupid little audio story, Lab Rats, the Whole Story. For this part, I shall be reading chapter 11, Unholy Terror. And my god, was this chapter extremely difficult to write, and as it turned out, extremely difficult to edit. I must apologise in advance for a few moments where the audio kind of goes a bit fuzzy. Decided to start raining really heavily whilst I was recording it in a few places, and there's also the usual general incompetence from me with bad edits and my brain deciding to try and read an entirely different story from the one that I'm trying to read, and just screwing up words and, you know, the usual crap that my brain does. So this was quite an ordeal to make this video, and I think my brain started to melt in the process. But anyway, without further ado, here is chapter 11, Unholy Terror. I fucking hate this chapter. Chapter 11, Unholy Terror. Paul emerged from his bedroom, pulling a thick blue fleece over his head. In his right hand he held 2 small torches and carried a big red waterproof jacket in his left hand. "Here, you can have my jacket if you want. It'll be cold outside." "Thanks," said Colin, relieved to be getting something to keep him warm at last. He took the jacket from Paul and zipped it up. Paul handed him one of the torches. "Here's a torch as well. Just stick close together and we'll follow the dot on the scanner." Paul took out a small device from his pocket. The little scanner device was in fact a yellow Game Boy Pocket, which he had inserted into its game cartridge slot a customised cartridge, slightly bigger and bulkier than a normal Game Boy cartridge, with an antenna coming out the top. Colin could see that there was nothing on the screen. Paul looked at him and sighed. "I haven't switched it on yet. It's not going to be picking up the signal until we get over onto the other side of the portal, is it?" "Oh yeah, I knew that. That reminds me. Computer, can you make sure those outside people stay in the rec room and don't try to leave? I doubt their tiny minds could handle a situation like this." There was no response from the computer. "Computer! Computer!" Paul repeated. "Maybe you broke it." The computer responded at the sound of Colin's voice. "No, Colin, I am not broken." "Oh, I see. You're ignoring me, are you?" The computer failed to respond to Paul once again. "Computer, cut this out, now!" Colin decided to try and talk to the computer. "Say, computer, could you make sure that my friends in there don't try to leave while the portal is still active?" "Of course, Colin. We don't want to frighten them after all." "Thank you, computer," Colin said smugly. "Don't mention it, Colin. Always happy to help." Paul rolled his eyes in disgust. "Ugh, how childish. His name isn't even Colin, you know." I don't mind being called Colin." "Very well. Come along, Colin. We've got more important things to do than play stupid games with a dumb computer." The 2 boys left the lab by going up the secret stairs behind the cupboard to the roof. They were now ready to venture out into the darkness in search of the mysterious power source that lay hidden someplace north in Farway's forbidden forest. As they climbed up the rope and pulled themselves out of the portal, they saw the unconscious police officers lying on the road. "Typical of these normal people," said Paul. "They see something they can't explain and they just can't handle it. Poor weak-minded fools." It was only a 5-minute walk from the portal to the end of the street. Paul and Colin looked up at the big, imposing gates of Farway's forest. The design of the gates looked quite Victorian. They were solid metal, painted black, with small sections where it looked like rust had burst through the paint. It had decorative spikes around the top and fancy curved features that weaved in and out of the intricate design. Standing on either side of the gates were 2 large granite obelisks, decorated with patches of moss, which had been holding the ancient gates in place for over 100 years or so. The tall fence that matched the black painted gates stretched out from the obelisks into the distance, separating the houses of Demonfield from the trees on the other side. Colin blinked his tired eyes as he looked up at the towering gates, feeling quite fatigued, but also too frightened to let his guard down. "Well," Paul said shakily, "after you." "Do we really have to go into this place?" Colin asked, hoping that Paul would go first. "Can't you just find another way to close the hole?" "I told you, we're not closing the hole. We're going to speed up its expansion. And as you know, the only power source capable of doing that is this mysterious object in the woods." Paul did not even try to open the gates, as he already knew that they had been rusted shut for quite some time, instead choosing to climb the fence. The decorative spikes were not sharp and made for excellent footholds. He pulled himself up the fence and jumped over the other side with a thump. He landed on a soft pile of dead pine leaves, which dampened the impact but pierced his hands, making his fists look a little bit like two hedgehogs. Fortunately, the pine needles were not strong enough to penetrate the skin too deeply. Colin followed him up the fence. He struggled to find his footing and slid back down. On the second try, he managed to get up over the fence, but as he was climbing back down, he snagged his jacket on one of the spikes. He struggled to get the jacket free and slipped down the other side. They heard a rip, and Colin was free again. He landed on his backside, but was not hurt. "You just ripped my jacket, didn't you?" Paul said grumpily. "No, don't worry about me, I'm fine," Colin replied. "Come on then, not a moment to lose." Paul disappeared into the darkness among the trees. Frightened that he might end up alone in the dark, Colin quickly got up and followed on after Paul. They switched their torches on and started waving them about. Despite the light shining on them, the trees still seemed black and sinister. Colin darted the light around him, hoping that it would scare away anything lurking in the woods. Paul pointed his light up at the sky. It made a beam of light that seemed to go all the way up into the sky, illuminating a cloud above. A small flicker of blackness darted through the beam of light. "Look, bats!" Paul whispered. "Bats? What's that?" "Small furry rodents with wings. They find their prey in the dark, with sonar rather than sight, like we use. Very interesting little animals." "Do they bite?" "No. Well, some of them do, but not these ones, I don't think." "They bloody well better not," Colin said, more to lift their spirits more than anything else. It was becoming quite clear to Colin that Paul was not doing so good. His torchlight seemed to jitter about around the trees as he shivered slowly along in the dark. Seeing Paul seemingly so scared did not help Colin get over his own fear of this dark woods. Paul suddenly stopped and shone his torch over at Colin. He almost blinded him in the process. "You know, maybe we should go back to the lab. You know, just in case other people find out what's happened and try to interfere with the portal," Paul reasoned. "What about finding this mysterious power thingy? I thought you said we needed it for the portal." Yeah, we do. But at the same time, well, there are two of us. Why not I go back and make sure that no one finds out about the hole? You can go on ahead and get whatever's in this woods here." "You're not scared, are you?" "What? Of course not. I'm just a little worried that someone might find out about the lab and the hole that we've made, that's all." Sure. Alright, so I'm a little bit scared. But look at this place. You've never been here before. You don't know what lives in here. All the more reason that we should go together. After all, you know this place better than I. You know I'm not exactly fond of this place either, but we have to just keep going. Remember what will happen if we don't. How can you do it, Colin? How can you just go on like that, when you're scared out of your wits? I don't know, Paul. I just don't think about it, I suppose. I'm scared of this place too. I hate the dark and the cold, but I keep going, because all of our lives are at stake right now, and, well, I trust you. I'm sure you can fix things. You mean that? Of course. You are the smartest person I know, Colin smiled. Paul couldn't resist smiling back. Colin, I'm the only person you know. Exactly. Paul switched on his Game Boy and shone the torch on the screen at an angle that he could see it at, as the Game Boy Pocket screen did not light up by itself. Okay, it looks like we're on the right track, he said before switching it off and putting it back in his pocket. The two boys started walking again. There's just one thing I don't understand, Colin said. What? Why the hell did you make us go through all that effort to lift the computer at the portal if you could just have easily used that thing you've got there in the first place? Paul waved his torch around the trees as though he was looking for something. After a few moments of waiting had passed, Colin realised that Paul was ignoring his question. He decided to try another. So this place is really full of, what was it you said? Man-eating trees? Ghosts and stuff? Yeah, or so they say. But I wouldn't worry about that. The stories of this place being full of ghosts and monsters are obviously just exaggerated. I mean, really, have you ever seen any ghosts? No. I mean, I don't think so. How would I remember anyway if I had? You see? And nor have I. Paul lied. Besides, this place isn't so bad. I'm quite fond of trees, you know. They remind me of the woods that Sarah and I used to play in. We'd take our toys into the woods and make up funny little stories for them to act out. Sometimes we'd even go round to this pond and fish for eels. Why? Just for something to do. It was better than being stuck in the orphanage all day, being bullied by the other kids. We had so much fun. Climbing trees, building huts, going for little adventures deep into the woods. Oh, the adventures we used to have in those woods. The number of times we saved the world from impending doom. You mean you've done this sort of thing before? No. It was all just pretend, you see. It was us just playing silly games. Funny that. The number of times we played games where we bravely saved the world as though it was nothing. And now here I am, really trying to save the world for real, and I'm shaking like the little coward that I am, terrified out of my mind. Of course, we wouldn't be in this situation if you hadn't got so angry and put the world in danger in the first place. Paul shone his torch angrily at Colin. I'm just saying, Colin said. Paul turned his torch around again and continued on talking. Of course we would eventually reach Farway's forest. I had always wanted to venture deeper into this place, but the huge fence always scared Sarah, so we had to turn back at that point. I wonder what she would think of me now, here in this scary part of the woods, actually saving the world for real. Maybe one day you'll see her again, and you can tell her all about it. Yeah, maybe, if she's still alive, and if we survive this. So who is this Farway person anyway, and why do they have a creepy forest named after them? Oh, that would be Captain Earl Farway. He was the one who originally discovered Altiof, well, at least in modern times, back in the 1500s I think it was. Of course people lived in Altiof before that, but they all mysteriously disappeared a few hundred years before Farway. Nobody knows why or how, but the island became lost and forgotten. It just seems to have vanished from history. It's kind of funny. Columbus found America when he was looking for Asia, and Farway found Altiof when he was looking for America. Perhaps another new land will be discovered one day in the future when somebody is looking for Altiof. Colin did not find Paul's little joke very amusing. Well, anyway, after discovering this mysterious land that had somehow been missed by everyone else who had previously sailed across the Atlantic, Captain Farway and his crew and all the colonists on board disappeared. It was only when Captain Garamont and his crew discovered the island for the second time, a few days after the last entry of Farway's diary, that anyone discovered what had happened. What? What had happened? Nobody's quite sure. The last few pages of Farway's diary were not as coherent as his previous entries, and the things he wrote about were somewhat cryptic. Most people think that he and most of the others with him had caught some kind of fever that drove them mad. As well as that, they also think that there was a mutiny among the men. Some wanted to stay on this new land and set up a colony, while others wanted to get off as soon as they could. Violence broke out between those who thought they should stay and those who desperately wanted to leave. Farway talks about ghostly shadow men coming out of the forest and stealing people away with them. It was then that Captain Farway declared that it was forbidden for any of his men to enter or go anywhere near this forest, and that's how it came to be known as the Forbidden Forest. But most people these days refer to it just as Farway's Forest. The last few notes in his diary vaguely mention something about Farway being forced to go deeper into the forest with only his most loyal and trusted men. Some kind of rescue mission, perhaps. After that, nobody really knows what happened to him. Just like the ancients that came to Altiof before them, Farway and his crew and all the colonists just seem to have disappeared. All of them? Yep. Garamont and his crew never found any survivors. I don't like the sound of these ghostly shadow men. No, nor do I, Paul agreed. Whatever you want to believe about Farway and his crew, ever since that time, people have been coming out with all kinds of stories about the forest. Some that seem fairly far-fetched, and others, well, they may have some truth to them. So much so that people in the 1800s were so scared of this place that they even built a massive fence around the forest. Of course, that was over 100 years ago now. Most people don't believe in such things as ghosts and monsters. After all, it is the 1990s. We're a bit more sophisticated now. Yeah, well, I'm not too sure I would dismiss these stories so quickly. Something definitely doesn't feel right about this place. I mean, why would they build a fence around it in the first place if there was nothing here to fear? Well, maybe the people believed in the stories at first, but I'm sure they kept the old legends alive, just to appeal to tourists. Having said that, Altior doesn't exactly have the most welcoming of images. In more recent years, they've been trying to reinvent the image of this place as some kind of nature park. You know, fun for all the family, experience Altior's last true wilderness, discover part of our national history with hiking, picnicking, all that touristy advertising nonsense. Of course you believe in the old stories still though, don't you, Paul? What? What do you mean by that? Don't you remember? I saw this place back in the empty void. Only I saw it through your memory of it, and I saw some kind of monster then. Paul took a moment to think about this before dismissing Colin. Don't be silly. Remember that place was just taking bits of memory and fusing them together in strange ways to make all kinds of weird stuff. Just like with dreams. It was memories muddled around to make nonsense. Yeah, but not this one. I know. I had a feeling like this wasn't just a nightmare. That it was really happening. It must have been a really vivid memory. Oh, shut up, Colin. What do you know about memories? You haven't got any, remember? You forgot everything? No, you shut up, Paul. I know what I saw was something that happened to you here in this forest. Now why don't you just stop being an idiot and tell me what happened? Paul stood still and looked around angrily with his torch before sighing and looking grumpily at Colin. All right, but you're going to think this is really silly. That's what you said the last time you told me the truth, and I didn't think you were silly then, did I? Well, no, but this isn't quite the same. Well, actually, no, it's not the same. Paul began to slowly walk forward again before continuing to talk. The ancient Altovians who lived in Altior way before Farway discovered it had this legend of a being that lived beyond the years of the world. It was kind of their idea of God. It was called the Mia. The Mia was said to be the last survivor of the end times, far, far into the future. It survived until the very end of the world and was unable to die, doomed to be alone for the rest of eternity. But the Mia gathered up the last remaining energy of the world, and using every last bit of energy it could, it created a sword, powerful enough to cut through time itself. The Mia planned to use this sword to cut a hole through time and live through the years of the world once more. Kind of like the time machine? Colin interrupted. What? Oh, well, yeah, I guess so, yes. However, this sword that the Mia created, I forget the name of it now, but it was so powerful that it cut right through the fabric of time and space so forcefully that it sent the Mia all the way back to the very beginning of time, or at least the beginning of the world. The ancient Altovians are a little unclear about that. However, in the process, the Mia itself was cut in half, creating two lesser Mias, the Light Mia and the Dark Mia. It's basically the ancient Altovians' creation myth. Every culture has one. The Altovians believed that the two Mias fought for the sword, and their fighting was so powerful that it caused the world to crack open and caused the lands to flood, creating the oceans and volcanoes to erupt, creating the lands. The Light and the Dark Mia then created creatures to aid in their fight. The Dark created terrible monsters, and the Light created humans and other such creatures. So what does any of that have to do with the thing you saw? Do you think the thing you saw was the Dark Mia, or one of its monsters? I know it seems silly, but yes, or at least I think I saw something which may have resembled the old legends. Of course, I don't go in for all that religious crap, and obviously a story like that doesn't really make any sense when you realise how obvious it is that humans evolved and were not created out of thin air like that. But at the same time, there are still many mysterious things about this world that we still have no understanding of. And I do think that it may indeed be possible for such beings that we might perceive as ghosts or demons could in fact be some kind of unidentified life form. So you think that this green-eyed monster thing you saw in the forest might be some kind of unknown creature? Possibly, but I think it's more than just a simple creature. There's something else you should know about that green-eyed thing you saw. I saw it, not only that night after I'd run away from the orphanage, but I also saw it in my earliest memory. The first thing I can remember was the lab around me on fire. As I said to you before, there was a man that seemed to somehow get into the lab. He did something, I don't know what, but he somehow set everything on fire in an instant, or at least that's how I remember it, which could be wrong, but I still remember as he looked over at my dad, his eyes shone. They glowed as green and terrible as the old legends of the Dark Mia's eyes did. I know it sounds mad, but whatever it was that destroyed the lab, I'm sure it wasn't human. Colin wasn't sure what to make of it all, and just simply replied, I see. He shone his torch down at Paul's pocket and spoke. We've been walking for quite a bit now. Maybe we should see if we're still on track. Right. Paul pulled out his Game Boy and switched it on. Not far now, I should think. Paul went to place the Game Boy back in his pocket, but his hands were so shaky that he dropped it on the ground. Bugger. As he went to pick it up again, there was the sound of a snapping twig, not too far away in the darkness. Paul shot up in a quick spasm of movement as he gasped for air. Colin darted around and shone his torch in the direction of the sound. What was that? Paul hissed quietly. I don't know. Let's just keep moving, Colin stammered. Oh shit, I don't like this. Paul started to speak nervously. Come on, Paul, I said keep moving. There's no need for this. We have a job to do, remember? Right, yes. Okay, let's just get going. Colin tried his best to keep calm. He was terrified, but he knew he had to stay doubly calm for himself and Paul. He tried to relax Paul and himself by talking and taking their minds off the situation. So what's the deal with you and this computer anyway? He asked Paul. Don't talk to me about that thing. I hate it. Well, it seems to like me, okay. Maybe if you just gave it a name it would respond better to you. It responds to me just fine when it wants to, and I don't care how much it wants me to. I am not giving it a name. It's a computer. Its name is computer. That's what it is, and that's what I call it. Just a plain, simple, dumb computer. It's just a simple tool. That's all it is. But it has intelligence. Not really. It's just simulated intelligence. It can't really think. It's not like you or I. Simulated or not, it still feels alive to me. I don't understand you. You should be very proud of your achievement. I feel like that I can sympathise with it. You sympathise with it? What does that mean? Well, I can't remember my past, as you know. These past 2 days I've been struggling to find out who I am, what I like, what I dislike, create a new identity for myself. Like me, all the computer wants is to know itself. It's intelligent enough to develop its own personality. If you give it a name, I'm sure you both get along better. No! It's not like owning a pet. As soon as you give something a name, then you start to develop an emotional attachment to it. My dad once had lab rats which he named. Big mistake. I only planned to have it running for as long as I had work to do in the time machine. Now that I'm almost finished, I'm planning to get you home, and then I'm saying goodbye to that awful place and this awful time period once and for all. So I'll have no need for the computer AI anymore. Really? You're just going to go and leave her here? Yes. Besides, I can't get emotionally attached. Not again. Not after what happened with Sarah. I don't want to feel that way again. Especially not for some stupid computer. It's not alive. It doesn't need my attention. It's a machine. Like I said, it's a simple tool. Maybe it doesn't need your attention, but it's clear to me that you need it. What? I don't need it, or anyone else for that matter. I'm not some overly emotional simpleton who constantly needs attention like some kind of attention-seeking baby. I have super-enhanced intelligence. I'm beyond such things. You may be a little bit different in the head, sure, But as far as I can see, you're still just as human as the rest of us. And your reliance on your super intelligence to support your fragile ego proves how weak-minded you really are. No, you're the weak-minded one. You simply don't understand. I'm not as human as the rest of you. I don't fit in with you lot. I'd rather not be like you people anyway. I don't have time for your emotions and sentimentality. I have the brain power to build a time machine, and perhaps one day I might even have the power to take over this world and change it, make everything right, and run it far better than the fools who run it now. Is that so, Mr. Superintelligence? I take back what I said earlier. You're not the smartest person I know. You're the dumbest person I know. That doesn't even make any sense. Shut up, I'm trying to make a point. The point being what exactly? If you're too afraid to develop any emotional attachment to anyone or anything, then you are no better than some simple, dumb computer. Even the computer of the lab seems more intelligent than you right now, because simulated or not, at least it can understand and be understood, more so than you, Mr. Superintelligence. But I don't have time to listen to your nonsense. I've learned it's best not to get too attached to people. Trust me, I know what people are like. You let them in and you think that they're your friends, but then they leave you behind, or they turn against you, just like you did. It's always the same. People don't really care about anyone else, only their selfish selves. I'm better off alone. Now hang on a minute. I did not just leave you behind or do any such nonsense. You were keeping me locked up in that lab. I only turned against you. A thunderous clap of an explosion set the quiet woods into a fit of sound. The two boys jumped violently from the ground, and the sound of rustling bushes and snapping twigs could be heard all around. "Oh shit! What was that?" Paul cried out. There was a loud screeching yelp from some animal running through the woods, and the panic-stricken Colin stumbled forward and darted backwards through the trees. Paul was utterly terrified and simply froze on the spot. They heard another loud bang, and more rustling and snapping twigs all around them in the darkness. "Come on, Paul, we have to get out of here. They're everywhere," Colin hissed loudly. "Monsters, ghosts, demons, everywhere." Colin pushed through the thick, overgrown bushes and tree branches as he tried to run as far and as quickly as he could. Paul saw the light of Colin's torch lighting up the bushes before it seemed to flicker out of existence, leaving only darkness. All his super-enhanced intelligence was totally useless to him at this moment, as Paul stood frozen to the spot, alone in the dark woods in the middle of the night. He regressed back to a more primitive and instinctual state of mind. He shivered violently as he looked all around him with deep loathing and suspicion. Eventually he was so utterly terrified that his shaking legs could no longer support him, and he just simply collapsed to the ground in a numb state of dumbness, weak and pathetic. He felt so small and inferior to his fellow human beings, which he hated. He could hear more rustling sounds that sounded like they were coming closer to where he lay. He felt he already knew what it was, and with tears in his eyes, he accepted his utter failure and humiliation. The green-eyed beast that had haunted him and hunted him all his life had finally caught up with him. He always had a feeling that he would end up like this, back in this godforsaken woods, alone with the monster that had killed his father. If only Colin had stayed with him, he thought. At least then he would not die alone. But the bugger ran away. Ran away and left him all alone. Again. He could hear the heavy footsteps now, and even imagined that he could already smell the putrid stench of the monster's breath bearing down on him. He decided it would be best to get it over quickly, so simply lay there on the ground. He switched off his torch and closed his eyes. Then his thoughts drifted back to the hole. He regretted that he would never fix it, and that due to his incompetence he was now responsible for the end of the world. He imagined the faces of the people he knew and had known throughout his life, all looking at him with shame and disgust. He felt it was no wonder that Colin had simply ran away and left him. He had been quite rude and in some ways very selfish to Colin. He saw Colin now looking down at him with pure hatred in his eyes. It was his fault that Colin had suffered memory loss. He had run away from him before because he had been nasty to him, and now he had run away again to spite him, it seemed. He imagined him laughing as he was running through the woods now, glad of the monster killing Paul. Now Paul could hear the loud crunching of the ground and the monster approaching him in the pitch dark. He could hear its horrible beastly grunting as it got closer. It had sounded just the same as the last time he had encountered it in these very woods several years before. He remembered those horrible green glowing eyes coming out of the darkness at him. He opened his eyes briefly, and looking into the darkness now, he could see those very same green eyes staring right at him. He shut his eyes again, and his mind went back to that night, several years ago. The day he had run away from the orphanage, chased off by the other kids. He had wandered far into Farway's forest, and had gotten quite lost. As the day drew to an end, and the forest was drowned in darkness, fear overtook Paul. He was exhausted from all the running, and his adrenaline was low. He felt so weak and cold, and was unable to fight against his fear of the dark, taking over his mind. That night he had no torch to light the way. He wandered in darkness and utter terror, obsessed with the idea that he was about to be attacked by some ghost or monster. Then he saw it. 2 green glowing dots in the far-off darkness, staring at him, unblinking. The same glowing green eyes from his first memory, the memory of being trapped in the burning lab. He had ran for miles until he had reached the gates of the forest. They would not budge, so he had to climb over them. Then, after walking through the streets filled with suspicious-looking eyes following him, he finally reached the safety of the old abandoned lab, where he would hide for the rest of his life until this very night that he lay now so helplessly far from the lab's thick, safe walls. He was like a weak little hermit crab that had lost its shell. He felt it was a fitting end for someone as weak and cowardly as himself. His mind drifted back now to that day he had ran away. The look on Sarah's face, a look of hate for this cowardly little freak that he felt he was. He had confessed to Colin back at Jim's cafe how he had thrown the rock at Sarah by accident. That was the story he liked to tell himself. But the truth came flooding back to him now of what really happened. It wasn't Sarah that was so scared to go over the fence into Farway's forest. It was Paul. Since his earliest memory, Paul had been terrified of ghosts and demons. The other kids could not understand and would never have believed his story of the green-eyed demon. All the stories they used to tell of Farway's forest being full of ghosts and monsters used to keep Paul awake at night. The only thing that could calm him down was to sit up, looking out the window and wonder at the stars shining so brightly in the night sky. He wished desperately to be up there, in another, brighter world, far away from the scary land of Altiof. But Sarah was insistent that they should go on an adventure into Farway's forest, that doing so would help Paul be less scared. If only he had had the guts to follow her over the fence into the world of the unknown. But Paul couldn't do it. Then Ryan and some of the other kids showed up. Ryan made fun of Paul for being a little coward and bragged about how he had been into Farway's forest many times. Paul's reaction to this was anger. Ryan, however, was much too big and strong for Paul, so instead he took it out on Sarah, saying that she only got him out here so that Ryan could pick on him and make a fool out of him. It was then that Sarah said she had had enough of Paul's grumpiness and decided to go off back to the orphanage with Ryan and the other kids. This really upset Paul. His only friend was abandoning him, just like how he had been abandoned before. He picked up the rock that would live in infamy in his memory for the rest of his days. He threw the rock, but not at Ryan as he had told Colin. He had thrown it at Sarah. Not to hit her, but simply to scare her. In some twisted way, he just wanted to teach her some kind of lesson about not abandoning her friend like that. but Paul's aim was off a little. Instead of throwing the rock to miss her and scare her, he instead managed to clunk her quite squarely on the back of her head. She fell down on her face and didn't get back up. Paul had never felt so numb and empty as he felt in that moment. The only thing he felt was the cold sweat and his heart beating like a steam engine as it was strangled with guilt and horror. When the other kids had seen what had happened, they shouted some very hateful things to Paul and pelted him with stones. He ran as fast as he could as they chased after him. It was only his fear of being caught that cancelled out his fear of Farway's forest and allowed him to get over the fence. Presently none of these things he remembered seemed to matter anymore, as the world was soon to come to an end. But not before Paul met his end. He could now feel the ground around him move as the beast came and stood over him. All Paul could do was whimper, as the beast stood and stared down at him with bloodlust. Paul no longer had any need of his time machine, as his mind took him all the way back to before he was in the orphanage. He had been taken away from the lab to live with a man and a woman who just could not understand their adopted child. At first Paul had tried to hide his adult-like intelligence by acting babyish. However, it was soon clear to him that this family wasn't quite to his liking. They of course wanted a normal little baby and expected it from Paul. But Paul had other plans, and even at that early age he was thinking up the first few drawings of what was to become his time machine. His adopted mum and dad found his behaviour very strange and did not like the fact that he spent so much time alone, drawing by himself. They wanted him to go outside and play with kids his own age, but Paul, of course, having the brain of an adult, had very little patience for his fellow toddlers. What was worse was that his adopted parents were church-going Christians who wanted Paul to grow up Christian too. This only helped to drive a further wedge between them and Paul, who simply refused to accept their religion, and the more they pushed it, the more Paul became hostile. They soon became afraid of Paul, who no longer hid his advanced state of mind from them. Fearing that they had adopted some kind of demon baby, his adopted Christian parents chose to get rid of him. By now he was 4 years old, and his adopted mother was expecting a baby. They used this as an excuse, he felt, to get rid of him. They abandoned him at the orphanage and said that he was a very disturbed little boy who needed greater care than they could provide. And so Paul, who now lay helplessly on the ground as the beast of his nightmare stood over him, began to cry. It seemed to him that the beast was now starting to bend down. He assumed that its claws were about to strike him and end his miserable little life. He dared not look up at it, and clenched his watering eyes shut. Then his mind drifted even further back in time, to that first memory of his, to that first experience of being abandoned. He felt now the awful heat as the flames burned fiercely outside the safety of the smart array, which he was trapped inside of. There in front of him, through the thick glass, he saw his dad standing among the flames. Over at the door was the strange man, who seemed to have some kind of control over his dad. The strange man stared at him with those evil green glowing eyes, and his right arm was stretched out, with his hand bent and twisted in a Dracula-like hand gesture, seemingly controlling his dad like a puppet. Even then, as he was just a little baby, freshly altered from the smart array, the alteration of his brain had taken effect, and he could understand things far beyond his age. He tried desperately to shout out to his dad, but as a baby his speech skills had not yet developed, and so he simply cried out as a baby would. He tried to shout to his dad to rescue him from the burning heat, to take him out the machine and far away from the fire. But his dad did not or could not do anything to help Paul. He never even looked at him. His dad was paralysed by the strange man. He just left him in the burning lab as he and the strange man disappeared into the flames, never to be seen again. But now as Paul was reliving this nightmarish memory, it seemed to continue beyond his memory. He now felt the burning flames coming through the machine, and they were licking at his flesh, and those green eyes came glowing out of the flames in front of him, getting closer and closer until... Paul! Hearing his name being shouted made Paul jump sharply, back into the present. The feeling of the flames burning him fizzled out and were replaced by the nipping cold of the winter's night. "Paul, what are you doing? Are you all right?" What? Paul shivered quietly. He looked up and was almost annoyed to be brought back into the conscious world. He looked up and was nearly blinded by the sharp white light of Colin's torch in his face. Don't shine that in my eyes." "Oh, sorry." He shone the torch away from Paul. He then held out a hand and helped Paul to his feet. "I thought you'd run away. What happened?" said Paul. "Well, I realised you weren't behind me, so I came back this way to try and find you. Luckily, I managed to find you again in the dark." You came back for me?" "Of course. I was worried something had happened to you. But I thought you hated me. Wouldn't you be glad if something bad happened to me?" "What? I didn't say I hated you. I mean, sure, you can be a pain in the arse sometimes, but why the hell would I want something bad to happen to you?" I don't know. Most people don't like me." I'm not most people. Besides, without you, I don't have much chance of getting home, do I?" Colin smiled lightly. "Right, of course it's all my fault that you're here in the first place. It's all my fault for everything. I'm sorry I was so mean to you earlier. It's been a while since I've had time to really talk to anyone other than that computer." "It's okay, Paul, I forgive you." Colin put out his hand towards Paul. Paul jumped back slightly, still quite scared of his surroundings. "We friends now?" Colin asked. Paul looked at him nervously before smiling and taking his hand in a firm handshake. "Okay, thank you, Colin. Thank you for coming back for me, friend." "No problem. That's what friends do, right? Save each other from monsters." "Did you see it?" Paul whispered, suddenly afraid again. "See what?" "The demon. The green-eyed demon." "What?" "No. Although I did see this other monster. I saw this big monster with big horns and a long neck. It was very weird looking. Not at all like the thing you saw. It had hair all over it and walked on 4 legs. Well, I say walked. It more sort of hopped up and down and had a silly-looking white fluffy tail that made it easier to see when it ran." Paul laughed at Colin's description of the monster he had seen. "A deer? What? A deer? It sounds like you saw a deer." "It was only a deer." "That's what that weird screeching sound was. They do that when they're scared." "Oh, so it wasn't a ghost or a demon then?" "No." "So why were you lying on the ground in the dark with your torch switched off? You could have died going to sleep out in the cold here." Paul looked up at the tree branch above his head. The torchlight illuminated 2 little green leaves that looked like 2 sharp, glowing green eyes. I thought I saw something, but I was mistaken." "Yeah, I was mistaken." "So, you good now?" "Yes. Thank you, Colin. I think I'm alright. Come on. Let's get moving again." Suddenly there was a whizzing sound, followed by a pop far off in the distance. Colin jumped at the sound of the odd popping sound, and Paul burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" Colin asked. "Just us silly little kids, that's all we are. Getting frightened over nothing, like stupid little dogs on bonfire night. It's just fireworks." "Of course. Tonight is New Year's Eve, after all. That's what those loud bangs we were hearing were. I realise that now." "What are fireworks?" Colin asked. "Perhaps you'll see some of them later, if we ever get out of here alive. Come on, we've still got to keep looking for this thing, whatever it is." Paul took his Game Boy out of his pocket, and his face lit up as he saw that they were now extremely close to the signal. "How does it look?" Colin asked. "We're very close now." He took a big gulp of air. "Sorry, I'm still a little shaky. I got a bit of a fright back there." "It's okay, we both got a fright. Just take a moment and we'll get moving again." "Thank you. You know, we haven't even got past the worst of it yet. We still have to find this thing, and then who knows what. If it really is an alien spacecraft of some kind, then we don't know if they will be hostile or not, or if they will even be able to help us. This plan of ours to get the power source to speed up the hole's expansion may still go very wrong. Paul, you always know the right thing to say to make people feel better, don't you? We'll just need to keep going and hope for the best, I guess." "Yeah, come on then. Let's face whatever we need to face. After you, friend. Colin waved Paul to go on ahead, which Paul, hesitating to move, was not at all thrilled about. You do annoy me sometimes, Colin, you know that. Hey, don't worry, I've got your back. Just make sure you follow me this time, if any monsters attack us. And don't just lie on the ground like an idiot. Oh, shut up. I saw you stumbling about and falling into that bush like the big scaredy cat you are. Don't give me any of that I'm braver than you nonsense. After a few shuffles back and forth trying to decide who should go first, eventually Paul got fed up, and with a slight dose of anger to overcome his fear, he stormed off ahead into the darkness of the woods. That is the end of Chapter 11, Unholy Terror, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope you come back for Part 7. Adios.